The crystal chandelier hanging 12 feet above the mahogany dining table flooded the room with a cold, perfect, and unforgiving light. It was a room designed not just for eating, but for displaying power, heritage, and absolute perfection. Every object here, the silver candlesticks, the porcelain plates, the oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors lining the walls, was chosen to tell a specific story. The Sterlings are better than you. The Sterlings are perfect. The Sterlings never fail. At the head of the table sat Richard Sterling, federal judge, millionaire, pillar of the Republican Party, and the man currently positioning himself to run for the United States Senate. He was the architect of this image, a man who treated his life like a political campaign and his family like a PR department. He sat perfectly upright, his silver hair combed back with military precision, his dark eyes sharp and calculating, his expression polished and unreadable. Beside him sat his wife, Eleanor. She was the perfect partner, elegant, educated, terrifyingly composed. Every movement she made was calibrated, every expression carefully curated. She wore a diamond necklace worth more than most people's houses, and she held herself with the stiff, regal posture of someone who believed her social standing was a divine right. And across from them sat me, Julian Sterling, 25 years old, graduate student in political science at Yale, the golden boy, the perfect son, the face of the family's bright future. Everyone in Connecticut knew who I was. They knew I was smart, handsome, charitable, and destined for greatness. They saw the dinners, the galas, the charity events, the photos of us smiling together as the ideal American family. They didn't know it was all a lie. They didn't know I was nothing more than a prop. Tonight, there was no wine, no conversation, no celebration. There was only silence, heavy and suffocating, and a plain brown manila envelope sitting exactly in the center of the table, positioned equidistant between me and my parents. It looked innocent, sealed only with a paperclip, but it radiated a cold, heavy danger that made the air taste like metal. "Open it, Julian," my father said. His voice was smooth, deep, and terrifyingly empty. There was no anger in it, no disappointment, only the tone of a man conducting business. My hands trembled as I reached out. My fingers brushed the rough paper, and for a second, I considered running, leaving everything behind, but I knew there was nowhere to go. I broke the seal and pulled out the contents. There were dozens of photographs. Some were taken secretly, using long lenses, showing me at a community center in New Haven, spending my evenings teaching English to immigrants and refugees. Others were screenshots of bank statements and financial ledgers, undeniable proof that I had secretly diverted a large portion of my monthly allowance from the family trust fund into grassroots organizations that provided legal aid and housing for the poor. I had done it because I believed in the values Richard had always preached: duty, service, leadership. I thought I was following his example. I thought I was making him proud. Then came the final document, the one that shattered my world. It was a certified copy of a birth certificate, issued by a small hospital in Gray Ridge, Ohio. The date of birth was exactly mine. The time was the same. But the name typed across the top was not Julian Sterling. It read, "Baby Boy Vance, you are not a Sterling." The words landed like a hammer blow to my chest. The room didn't spin. I froze. I looked up at the man I had called father my entire life, searching for a trace of regret, a flicker of love, or even a simple explanation. But I found only cold calculation, the same look he gave to lawyers standing before his bench. "Our son," Richard said slowly, leaning forward and folding his hands on the table, "was born 25 years ago. But he was not what we needed. He was born with severe complications. Cognitive disabilities, developmental delays, violent and unpredictable tendencies. caused by a rare genetic condition that runs in my family. He would never be able to function in society. He would never be able to stand in public, never smile for cameras, never carry the legacy I am building. He was flawed, imperfect, a disaster waiting to happen. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. I had plans. Julian. I had ambitions. Congress, then Senate, perhaps higher. A political career is built entirely on perception. The public does not want the truth. They want the story. They want the perfect marriage, the perfect home, the perfect child. They want to believe that success is a reward for being good, for being whole, for being normal. If the world knew I had a disabled son, my career would be over before it began. Everything I built would collapse. He gestured to me now, with a cold, appraising look, as if I were a piece of furniture he had once bought at an auction and now decided to throw away because it no longer matched the decor. We needed a healthy boy, a beautiful boy, someone smart, someone presentable, someone who could be molded, trained, and displayed like a trophy. We found you, a healthy baby in a poor, dying town in Ohio. We paid well for you $500,000, to be exact, and we erased every trace of where you came from. We made you Julian Sterling. For 25 years, you played your part perfectly. You were the shield. You were the image of perfection that protected our secrets while our real son was kept safe, hidden away in private clinics and specialized facilities where he couldn't ruin us. Eleanor spoke for the first time. Her voice was sharp, clear, and cold as glass. But you began to think for yourself. You gave our money to strangers. You asked questions. You showed empathy. You became unpredictable, a liability. Perfect tools do not think. Julian, they only serve. You were never meant to have a conscience. Now, Richard finished, leaning back in his chair as if the conversation were already over. My campaign for the United States Senate begins in earnest. We are ready to bring the real heir back into the picture. We have crafted a beautiful narrative, a family that overcame hardship, that cared for a sick child in private, that endured with dignity. It will make us look heroic. And you are no longer useful. You never were our son. You were just a replacement. And now, you are fired. 2 hours later, I was standing in the freezing rain at Greenwich train station, clutching only a cheap duffel bag with some clothes, my laptop, and exactly $42 in cash. My phone had been disconnected the moment I stepped out the door. My credit cards were dead. My social security number had been flagged and frozen, effectively erasing me from the system. I was nobody. I was less than nobody. I was a mistake that had been corrected. For the next 3 years, I lived in the deepest, harshest, most forgotten underbelly of New York City. I dropped the name Julian Sterling. I went simply by J, a name that belonged to no one. Perfect for a ghost. I worked any job that paid cash under the table washing grease-stained dishes until my hands were raw and bleeding, hauling heavy crates of frozen fish before dawn at Hunts Point Market, delivering packages through snow and heat, moving furniture for strangers. I slept in a cramped, mold-infested basement apartment in Queens, shared with 3 other men who barely spoke English, where the ceiling leaked when it rained and the heating never worked in winter. I learned exactly how much a human being is worth when the money and the name are stripped away. I learned that politeness means nothing if you have no wallet. I learned that the world Richard Sterling lived in was not just different, it was a separate reality, floating above the rest of us, untouchable and cruel. I thought I had accepted my fate. I thought I had died inside. I thought I would disappear forever. Then came a rainy Tuesday night in late October. I was working the late shift at the Inkwell, an old, dusty bookstore in Brooklyn, tucked away on a quiet side street. It smelled of decaying paper, old leather, dust, and rain, a scent that felt like safety to me now. It was 11:45 p.m., just 15 minutes before closing. The rain outside drummed a fierce, hypnotic rhythm against the large glass storefront, fogging up the windows and cutting us off completely from the dark, sleeping city. I stood behind the heavy wooden counter, counting the small amount of cash in the register, tired, sore, and ready to sleep. The bell above the heavy wooden door rang out a sharp, dry sound that cut through the quiet like a knife. I didn't look up immediately. We close in 15 minutes. Man, just a heads up. Heavy, wet footsteps approached the counter. The soles of his boots clicked rhythmically on the worn floorboards. Tap, tap, tap. Suddenly, the air in the room seemed to grow thicker, heavier, carrying a faint but unmistakable scent, expensive, custom-blended cologne mixed with the sharp, clean smell of rain. It was a scent I remembered vividly from the world I had lost. It was the smell of old money. "I'm not here to look for books," said a deep, rough, gravelly voice. It sounded like rocks grinding together, heavy with age, pain, and secrets. I looked up, ready to give my standard polite refusal, but the words died in my throat and froze solid. Standing across from me was a man in his 50s, wearing a long black trench coat that was soaked through and dripping water onto the floor. I knew enough about clothing to tell that single item cost more than my entire annual rent. He had sharp, piercing gray eyes and a jagged silver scar that ran from his left ear all the way down to his collarbone, a mark that looked like it came from a knife fight long ago. His face was weathered, lined with deep wrinkles carved by years of hardship and worry. But it wasn't the scar or the coat that made my blood run cold. It was his face. He looked terrifyingly, impossibly like an older, weather-beaten, scarred, and tired version of me. Same sharp jawline, same slight crookedness of the nose, same deep-set, melancholic eyes, same high forehead. It was like staring into a mirror that showed me exactly what I might look like in 30 years, if I survived that long. He reached into the deep inner pocket of his coat, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was pulling a weapon. Instead, he slowly, carefully slid an old, faded, laminated photograph onto the wooden counter between us. It was a picture of a young woman, tired-looking but with kind, gentle eyes and a soft smile, holding a newborn baby in her arms. Behind them stood a rusted metal sign half covered in vines that read, "Welcome to Gray Ridge, Ohio." The baby was wrapped in a simple, frayed blanket, and on the inside of his left wrist, there was a distinct dark mark shaped exactly like a five-pointed star. Slowly, instinctively, my breath hitching in my throat, I pulled back the sleeve of my worn, oversized hoodie. There, under the harsh, flickering fluorescent lights, the same star-shaped birthmark sat clearly on my skin. I had stared at that mark my whole life, a strange anomaly that none of the Sterlings or their relatives had ever possessed. It was a detail I had always wondered about, but never dared to ask. The man looked directly into my eyes, and a terrifying mix of profound grief and overwhelming relief washed over his scarred face. His hands shook slightly as he rested them flat on the counter. "It took me 25 years to find you," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion that shook me to my very core. "Your name isn't Julian Sterling, and you weren't adopted because that wealthy family wanted a child to love, or because they wanted to do a good deed. They didn't rescue you from a hard life." He leaned closer, his shadow falling over me, and his voice dropped to a harsh, commanding whisper that shattered my entire reality. "Your real name is Thomas Vance, and the people who raised you didn't adopt you. Thomas, they bought you like livestock, like a piece of property." The room spun violently around me. The towering walls of books seemed to close in. "Bought me," I choked out. "What are you talking about? Who are you?" "My name is Arthur Vance," the man said, keeping his hands visible to show he wasn't a threat, though his posture remained rigid and tense. I am your biological uncle, your mother's younger brother. 25 years ago, your mother, my sister Sarah, was a nurse in Gray Ridge, a bankrupt farming town in rural Ohio. She was young, struggling, drowning in medical debt after a bad accident, desperate and completely alone. Right at that exact same time, the Sterling's infant son was born. But he wasn't healthy. He was born with severe cognitive disabilities, developmental delays, and violent, unpredictable tendencies. He would never be able to function in society, let alone carry the family name in public life. Arthur took a deep breath, his gray eyes flashing with the embers of an old, unyielding rage. Richard Sterling was launching his first campaign for Congress. He had built his entire image, his entire fortune, his entire political platform on the idea of the perfect, blessed, untouchable family. A disabled child would destroy everything: his reputation, his future, his wife Eleanor's fragile mental state. She was already unstable, obsessed with appearances and perfection. So Richard used his immense wealth and shadowy connections to find a solution. He needed a healthy, beautiful baby boy whose disappearance could be easily erased. He found Sarah. Arthur tapped the photograph on the counter with a trembling finger. They paid off a corrupt hospital administrator who owed them favors. They falsified documents to make it look like Sarah had given birth to a stillborn child, a tragedy no one would question. They handed her a leather suitcase containing $500,000 in cash, more money than she would ever see in her life. And they threatened her. Thomas. They told her that if she ever looked for you, spoke a word, or even whispered your name, she would spend the rest of her life in federal prison, and they would make sure you never knew who she was. She took the money out of terror. Or at least, that is what I believed for a long time. But the guilt ate her alive. She became a shell of a human being. 10 years ago, she took her own life in a cheap motel room, alone and forgotten. But before she died, she left me everything: the original, unaltered hospital records, the bank transfer slips, and her personal diary, filled with every detail. My mind raced like a hurricane tearing through a coastal town. The pieces of the puzzle began to slam together with sickening precision. The Sterlings hadn't rescued a poor orphan out of the goodness of their hearts. They had orchestrated a high society transaction to protect their image and their power. The brutal rejection I faced at 25 wasn't because I broke their rules or gave money to charity. It was because I had started asking questions, digging into legal systems and financial networks that might accidentally uncover the trail of their old crimes. I was becoming too independent, too visible, too dangerous. They needed me gone before I stumbled upon the truth by accident. Why now? I asked, my voice cracking, a hot tear of anger and sadness slipping down my dirty cheek. Why come to me now, after letting me live like a rat on the streets for 3 miserable years? Where were you when I was sleeping on a concrete floor in Queens? Because Richard Sterling is running for the United States Senate, Arthur said, pulling a sleek tablet computer from his coat and turning on a live news broadcast. And he is doing it on a platform of family values, child protection, and strict law enforcement. He's playing the saint for the cameras, talking about protecting children and upholding the law. But look at the screen. Thomas, look closely at what they did to you. Look at who took your place. The news anchor was broadcasting live from a glittering, multi-million-dollar charity gala in Manhattan. Standing on the velvet-draped podium was Richard Sterling, looking pristine, powerful, and utterly untouchable in a custom tuxedo. Next to him was Eleanor, smiling radiantly, a massive diamond necklace catching the bright lights, her posture perfect and proud. And standing on their right side, basking in the applause of New York's billionaires, celebrities, and politicians, was a young man roughly 28 years old, with slicked back blonde hair, elegant posture, and a charming but vacant, distant smile. The text at the bottom of the screen read, Richard Sterling introduces his son and campaign manager, Julian Sterling. I froze. I stared at the screen, my breath completely trapped in my lungs, as if a 1,000-ton rock had been dropped onto my chest. I looked at the man's face. He didn't just share my name. He had my hair color, my height, my build, the same shape of the face. He looked like he could have been my brother. But his eyes were different, empty, distant, and slightly wild, darting around the room as if he didn't understand where he was or what was happening. That is the real Julian Sterling, Arthur said bitterly, his voice low and tight with hatred. Their biological son. The one they hid away in private clinics and specialized facilities his whole life. Ashamed of his condition. Terrified of what people would think. They kept him secret while they used you, the healthy, smart, handsome substitute, to build their legacy and their reputation. You were the public face, the perfect son, the trophy they showed off to the world, while the real heir was locked away behind high walls and heavy doors. Now that you are gone and erased, now that you have been wiped from existence, they have finally brought him out. They are parading him around as the son they always had. They are lying to the whole country, and they are about to get away with it. They are about to become one of the most powerful families in America, built entirely on lies and your stolen life. Arthur reached into his coat again and pulled out a thick, heavy, sealed envelope, stuffed full of papers, photographs, and digital drives. I have spent years gathering this proof. Every document, every receipt, every falsified record, every bank transfer, every medical report. It is all here, organized, verified, undeniable. I was going to take this to the press myself, but they found me first. They know I am here. They know I found you. They will kill us both to keep this secret. Suddenly, the glass storefront shattered into a million flying shards. A heavy, explosive crash ripped through the silent night. A black tactical canister bounced across the hardwood floor, instantly spewing thick, acrid, blinding white smoke into the room, filling every corner in seconds. The store's fire alarm began to wail, a piercing, deafening shriek that filled the space with chaotic noise and confusion. Thomas, take this run now. Arthur roared, throwing the heavy envelope toward me as two masked men in black tactical gear burst through the broken window frame, weapons raised and ready. I grabbed the packet and scrambled toward the back door, my lungs burning from the smoke, hearing the loud bang-bang of suppressed gunshots behind me. I heard Arthur cry out once, a sharp, terrible sound. Then silence. I ran blindly through the alleyways of Brooklyn, rain and smoke stinging my eyes, my legs burning, until I collapsed breathless and shaking blocks away, hiding in a dark doorway, clutching the envelope against my chest, the only thing I had left, and the only thing that could bring them down. When the adrenaline faded and the bruises began to show, I realized Arthur wasn't dead. He had been shot, but the bullet had hit his shoulder, missing anything vital. He had dragged himself to safety, bleeding and in pain, but alive. I found him later that night, hiding in a storage unit he had rented months ago, surrounded by boxes of files and research. "I'm too old for this," he groaned, wincing as I cleaned the wound with alcohol and old rags. "But I'm not dying yet. Not until I see them fall." Over the next few weeks, Arthur and I became partners in a war against the dynasty that had stolen my life. We didn't hide. We worked out of a small, cramped apartment in Brooklyn, cross-referencing every document, verifying every source, building a case so solid it could not be ignored. Arthur was more than just a witness. He was the link to my past. He told me stories about my mother, Sarah, about the small town we came from, about the life I could have had. He became the only family I had ever known. He was tough, cynical, fiercely protective, and surprisingly wise. He taught me that the truth was powerful, but only if you presented it like a lawyer, cold, hard, and undeniable. Richard thinks money buys silence. Arthur told me one night, coughing into his fist, his face pale and tired. Years of stress, bad health, and old injuries were catching up with him fast. He thinks because he paid, he owns the story. But he forgot one thing: paper lasts longer than power. Money can be spent, influence can fade. But a document, a signature, a record that lasts forever. We agreed on the strategy: no violence, no threats, just facts. We wouldn't storm their house or try to fight them physically. They had private security, police on their payroll, guns. We had history. We had evidence. We had the truth. We spent weeks preparing. We made copies of everything. We hid backups in safe places. We mapped out exactly how the story would break, which journalists to trust, which agencies to contact. And all the while, we watched Julian Sterling. As the campaign gained momentum, the real Julian was becoming more visible. He was everywhere, on billboards, in newspapers, on television. And the more we saw him, the clearer it became that he was not just a victim of illness. He was a monster in the making. Arthur was right. He was the product of his parents' arrogance. Raised in isolation, told he was a king, told the world owed him everything, told that rules were for other people. He was spoiled beyond belief, dangerously unstable, and completely lacking in empathy. In interviews, he would interrupt reporters, snap at his staff, and make bizarre, arrogant statements about how people like us are meant to lead, and people like them are meant to follow. He was terrifying, and he was about to become a senator's son. "Look at him," Arthur said one evening, pointing at the TV screen where Julian was laughing at a joke that wasn't funny. His eyes dead and cold. Richard and Eleanor didn't just hide a sick boy. They created a sociopath. They taught him that he is superior, that he is untouchable. And now they want to put him in the center of American politics. If we don't stop them, they will ruin a lot more lives than just yours and mine. On a gray Tuesday morning, we walked into the offices of the New York Times together. Arthur stayed by my side while I handed over the copies. We told the story calmly, professionally, letting the evidence speak for itself. We didn't ask for money. We didn't ask for protection. We just asked them to print the truth. 3 days later, the explosion happened. The headline covered the entire front page of the Sunday edition's Senate candidate, Sterling accused of illegal adoption, fraud, and cover-up. Within hours, every major network picked it up: CNN, Fox News, The Washington Post, online news sites, radio stations, they all ran the story. The paper trail was perfect. The timeline was unassailable. The hospital administrator, now retired and terrified of going to prison, confessed to his role in the scheme. Witnesses came forward: former employees, old friends, people who had been too afraid to speak before, now protected by the media attention. The family foundation was audited by the IRS. The FBI launched a full criminal investigation. Richard Sterling tried to call it a malicious smear campaign and blackmail from a disgruntled former employee. But his voice shook. His usual confidence was gone. His perfect image was cracking. But the most terrifying part was watching Julian. As the pressure mounted, the mask slipped completely. On live television, during a press conference meant to defend his father, Julian broke down entirely. He screamed at reporters, ranted about peasants who don't matter trying to take what is mine, and threatened to have everyone who spoke against the family destroyed. He threw a microphone, knocked over a plant, and had to be dragged away by security while shouting that he would have them all fired, that his father owned the police, that he could do whatever he wanted. It was chilling. It confirmed everything Arthur had said. Julian wasn't just disabled. He was a product of his parents' arrogance. He truly believed he was entitled to everything, that rules were for others, that people like me were nothing but objects. That is what they made. Arthur whispered, watching the screen with tears in his eyes. That is the heir they chose over you. A monster. The arrest happened on a rainy afternoon, very similar to the night I was thrown out onto the street 3 years ago. Federal agents in raincoats entered the massive estate in Greenwich. They walked past the crystal chandeliers and the long mahogany dining table where my life had been destroyed. They walked past the portraits of ancestors and the expensive furniture. They walked through the rooms where I had grown up, where I had laughed, studied, and cried. They took Richard Sterling away in handcuffs, charged with multiple felonies that would likely see him spend the rest of his life in a federal prison cell, stripped of everything he had ever cared about. Eleanor Sterling was questioned by investigators, released due to lack of direct evidence linking her to the financial crimes, but effectively destroyed. She retreated from society, becoming a ghost in her own mansion, her reputation shattered beyond repair, her name synonymous with scandal and cruelty. She had nothing left: no husband, no son, no status, no friends, no dignity. Then they brought Julian out. He wasn't in handcuffs, but two large officers guided him firmly. He was agitated, pacing, shouting that he would have them fired, that his father owned them. He looked wild, unkempt, dangerous. He stopped at the gate, and his eyes locked onto mine. I was standing across the street, visible this time, no longer hiding. I stood tall, straight, clean, and calm. He recognized me instantly. He didn't know my name, but he knew exactly what I was. The ghost, the replacement, the one who proved he wasn't perfect, the one who ruined everything. A twisted, arrogant smirk spread across his face. He leaned forward, and even through the rain and the distance, I read his lips clearly. "You think you won?" He laughed, a sharp, bitter, broken sound. "You're still living my life. You always will." They led him away. Later. The news confirmed he would not go to prison. Due to his documented history of severe mental illness and instability, he was committed to a high-security psychiatric facility. He would live comfortably, funded by the hidden millions the Sterlings had stashed away, locked in a world of his own delusions safe, but trapped forever. A week later, sitting in our small apartment, Arthur's health finally gave out completely. The years of waiting, the stress, the old injuries, the gunshot wound, it all caught up. He was admitted to the hospital, his lungs weak, his body failing. As he lay in the bed, pale and thin, but at peace, he handed me one final package, sealed and marked, "Only after the truth is out." "I did what I promised," he whispered, gripping my hand with a strength that surprised me. "I found you. I gave you back your name. I helped you expose them. Now, you find out who you are. You build something better. You be the man they never deserved." He died that night. He was the only person who had ever chosen me, the only person who had fought for me, and I buried him with the star-shaped birthmark carved into his headstone. I cried for him. I cried for myself. I cried for the life we both lost because of the Sterling's greed. I opened the package when I got home. Inside were more letters, legal documents, and a small, old digital recorder. I pressed play. The voice that came out was soft, female, tired, but clear and steady. It was Sarah, my mother. "Arthur, if you are listening to this, I need you to know the truth. Not the story I told you, not the story I told myself to sleep at night. The real truth." My hands began to shake violently. The room seemed to drop away beneath me. I didn't sell him because I was poor. I didn't sell him because I was scared. I didn't sell him because they forced me or threatened me. I had debts, yes, but I could have paid them. I had struggles, yes, but I could have managed. I had family, I had you. Arthur, you would have helped me. They offered me $500,000. It was a fortune. Enough to leave this town, to start over. to build a life that wasn't hard and poor and small and hopeless. And I looked at that money, and I looked at the baby, and I made a choice. I chose the money. I chose a life without hardship. I chose freedom. $500,000 felt like the whole world to me. A baby felt like a burden I wasn't strong enough to carry, a mistake I had made, something that would hold me back, ruin my chances, keep me stuck here forever. I knew exactly what I was doing. I walked away. I signed the papers. I took the cash. And I never looked back. Not once. I never wondered where he was. I never worried if he was okay. I never regretted it. Not until now. Not until it was too late. The recording ended with a sharp click. For 28 years, I had told myself a story to survive. It was the story I whispered to myself on cold nights, the story that kept me going. My birth mother was a victim. She loved me but was forced to give me away. She wanted me, but couldn't have me. That hope was the only thing that kept me human. That belief was the definition of family to me. Now it was gone. Richard was a monster. Eleanor was his accomplice. Julian was a tragedy. And Sarah was just as guilty. She wasn't a victim. She was a seller. She had traded me for a better life, and she had never cared. I had to know. I had to see it with my own eyes. I had to look at the woman who chose cash over flesh and blood. I took a bus for 12 hours to Ohio, to Gray Ridge. It wasn't the dying, poverty-stricken place Arthur had described. It had grown. It had new shops, new roads, new houses, a new park. It looked prosperous, happy, forgotten. I asked around. I showed an old photo I had of Sarah. Oh, Sarah Vance. Yes, I remember her well. Pretty girl. Quiet. She left years ago, but she came back after changing her name. I think, married a wealthy businessman from the next county. Lives in that big white house up on the hill now. Has 2 kids. I think, a boy and a girl. Both grown up and in college. Never talks about the old days. Though, never mentions having another child. Says she's always lived here. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard it hurt to breathe. I walked up the long paved driveway. It was a beautiful home, large and bright, with warm lights glowing in the windows, a well-kept garden full of roses, a swing set long retired in the yard, 2 expensive cars parked in the driveway, a perfect, happy life. Everything I had ever wanted, everything she bought with me. I saw her. She was older, her hair lighter and styled nicely, her clothes expensive and well kept, her skin smooth and cared for. She looked healthy. She looked happy. She looked exactly like me. Same eyes, same nose, same mouth. She was coming out of the front door carrying a bag of groceries, and she saw me standing at the gate. Her smile faded instantly. Her hand tightened on the bag until her knuckles turned white. She didn't look confused. She didn't look like a mother reunited with a lost son. She looked terrified. Then she looked annoyed. She knew exactly who I was. We stood there, separated by a tall metal gate. She had a life full of warmth, love, and safety inside. I stood out in the cold wind, carrying only the truth and the pain. Why, I asked. My voice didn't crack. It was dead flat, empty of emotion, empty of hope. Why did you sell me? She stood there for a very long time. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating, filled with everything we could have said but didn't. She didn't ask me how I was. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry or reach out. She didn't try to explain or justify or make excuses. She didn't say she was sorry. She looked at me, really looked at me, studying the face she had given life to, the son she had carried for 9 months, and finally spoke. Her voice was calm, rational, and utterly heartless. There was no regret in it, no sadness, no love, because $500,000 felt more real than a baby. She didn't open the gate. She didn't invite me in. She didn't step closer. She just stood there, protecting the life she had bought with my existence, protecting the family she had chosen instead of me. I turned around slowly. I walked down the driveway. I walked past the flower beds and the expensive cars and the perfect house. I didn't look back. I didn't hug her. I didn't forgive her. I didn't scream or threaten or curse. I didn't cry. There was no point in revenge. Revenge implies you care enough to hurt them. I realized I didn't care about her enough to hate her anymore. She was just a stranger who had made a transaction. I walked away, leaving the past, the lies, and the ghosts behind me forever. 3 years later, the rain was falling again in New York. But this time, I was standing under a glass canopy outside a modern, sleek building in Manhattan. The sign above the entrance was polished brass, shining in the gray light. Vance and Associates, Human Rights Law. I was 31 years old now. I wore a sharp, dark suit that fit perfectly, tailored to a body that had learned to be strong. My office was on the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city I once slept on. I had a team of young, passionate lawyers working for me. We took cases no one else would touch: immigrants fighting deportation, families wronged by powerful corporations, people discarded by systems designed to protect the rich and punish the poor. I had become everything Richard Sterling hated, everything he feared, everything he told me was weak, useless, and pathetic. He once told me that weakness was unforgivable, that money and power were the only things that mattered, that justice was just a word used by people who couldn't afford to buy the outcome they wanted. I proved him wrong. I built my power on the very thing he tried to destroy: the truth. I built my success on the very people he stepped on: the forgotten, the discarded, the invisible. I was rich now, too. Not sterling rich, but wealthy enough to be independent, wealthy enough to fight, wealthy enough to never be vulnerable again. But more importantly, I had respect. I had a name that meant something good. I had a purpose. I walked down the street, heading toward the federal courthouse. I had a hearing today, an important one, challenging a corrupt policy that targeted low-income families. Reporters recognized me as I walked. They nodded. They stepped aside. They called me Mr. Vance. As I approached the heavy iron gates of the court, a convoy of vehicles pulled up. U.S. Marshals stepped out, forming a line. They opened the doors of the armored transport van. Out stepped Richard Sterling. He was old now. His hair was white and unkempt. His posture was bent. His shoulders hunched forward under the weight of his crimes. The expensive tailored suits were gone, replaced by a plain gray uniform. He looked smaller, fragile, and completely broken. The arrogance that defined him was gone, replaced by the dull, hollow look of a man who had lost everything: his freedom, his reputation, his family, his legacy. He was being led in for another procedural hearing, just another inmate in a long line of prisoners. He looked up as I passed. Our eyes met for a second. I saw the memory in his eyes. He remembered the boy he raised, the boy he threw away, the boy who destroyed his empire. He looked at my suit, at the way I walked, at the respect the officers gave me, at the name tag on my briefcase. He saw everything I had become, everything he could never be, everything he tried to kill. He opened his mouth, perhaps to speak, perhaps to beg, perhaps to justify one last time. I didn't stop. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him one last time, cold, steady, and proud, and walked past him, through the doors of the court, into the light. I spent 28 years searching for my family. I learned that blood is not loyalty, and a name is not an identity. Family isn't something you are born into. It's something you choose. And while every single person who should have chosen me didn't, I chose myself. And that was enough. I was Thomas Vance, and I had won.